Good morning. We'll be starting up in about 2 minutes. Well, it looks like Pat's joined us there, Mr.
Yep.
Willy. Good morning on Zoom and Facebook Live. We'll be starting up in about just a little over a minute and a half. Morning, Mr. Pat.
I'm here.
Well, good. Nice morning. Welcome
Yes.
to you. How's the rain up your way?
Real light.
Yeah, it was real light this morning.
Just enough to mess up the chip seals today.
Yeah, I don't think this is a good chip seal day.
Nope, nope.
We'll be starting up the webinar in about 1 more minute, folks.
Okay. I was really surprised about that email I got from the federal highway. It's like, holy cows.
There you go. You never know.
Yeah, share that with a supervisor later, I guess.
Yep. Well, we're going to share with everybody here in just about another 30 seconds or so. And I'm going to trust Willy to just move the slides forward as we go. He's good at it. He's a pro.
Don't try this at home.
Don't try this at home. Well, actually, I guess you have to try this at home. Okay.
Right.
Good morning and welcome. It's 9 o'clock. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here at the Cornell Local Roads Program, and welcome to our webinar on keeping culverts well, types of deterioration and preservation techniques for culverts. Our speaker today is going to be Willy Gremke. He is one of our circuit riders, also works in the consulting industry. And how many years did you work for the county?
I worked 13 years for Washington County.
13 years. I can never remember that number. It's easier to ask. So, but before we get started with that, with the actual webinar, we actually wanted to make a quick announcement. So if you don't know about it, we have our Build a Better Mousetrap competition. And that's a pretty cool thing on slide 2 there, Willy, where we ask you to submit your ideas and suggestions. And for this year, we had 10 entries from 9 different agencies. They were pretty cool. And if you're interested, you can go see all the nominations, and maybe it is 9. Let's see, the next slide tells me how many, so I can get my numbers. It's 9 nominations from 8 agencies. But you can go on our website, you can see all the entries. There were some pretty cool ones. But all of those entries were submitted to a national competition for Build a Better Mousetrap. And in the past, we've actually had a winner. For the next slide, it shows you the winner we had in 2018 was the city of Beacon. Had a pretty cool entry that they had, and they won a national award winner for a particular category. But this year, we have another national award winner, and Pat Steger from the town of Niles has joined us. And what they've got is a Beaver pipe cage. And Pat, if you want to explain it real quick, what you've got on the left versus what you did on the right, and say hello to our friend Mr. Beaver there.
Sure. What we had is a 18-inch cross pipe there that the Beaver kept on plugging sticks and mud. He really packed it tight. So it was causing a flooding problem there. So what we did originally was took a gabion basket and cut a hole in the end and put a couple signposts out in the pond there and just to put some zip ties onto it, and that seemed to slow him down a lot. I mean, he still packed mud around it, but it was still able to flow water.
But it looks like he ate too much and crushed your...
He was going all the way around that basket. What we was doing is taking the excavator every little bit and just go over that road and clean out around it. And after a few times of cleaning out and about and him packing mud over top, the basket started collapsing. So I told my guys, I think we gotta, do something a little different. So what we did is went with a rigid. We ended up had some old galvanized signposts that we cut lengths of. Um, the only thing I had to buy, we had everything in stock really. The only thing I had to buy was some U-bolt brackets for four corners there, and the other thing was some threaded rod. And what we ended up doing is taking a 24-inch culvert, which just fits over top of the 18. We slid that through the end of the basket there. These Gabion baskets have a center panel there. We
Right.
eliminated that also, just to make it so it's a whole open box there, and cut the signpost to length. And the way we've got this set up on the far end out in the pond, there's a couple signposts driven down into the pond, and there's a pin out there, and all we got to do is pull the clip off the pin. If we got the 4-point pick on the basket hooked to the excavator, pull the pin on the other end, and that thing will slide right off the end of the pipe. You can pick it right up into the road and clean the debris off or whatever. We can get cleaned around it, and then you just take it back out there when you're done and set it back down and slide it back on the pipe, put the pin back in, and you're good for who knows how long. So
There you go.
And
Well,
being rigid, it doesn't collapse anymore.
well, that's good. Well, that's why you won one of the 4 national categories. But then when we had a vote last week at our national conference of LTAP centers across the country, you wound up winning at the very last minute. It was a close competition. At the very last minute, you wound up coming in first place. So congratulations.
I was very surprised at that. I've been really happy.
Well,
I shared
that's
the
good.
news with my guys this morning, and they was pretty excited.
Well,
we're
that's
thinking
cool.
We're thinking about our next Build a Better Mousetrap project.
We'll look forward to it, and we'll definitely look forward to seeing you next year. And actually, we'll probably contact you. Maybe we'll do some drawings up so other people can build this, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay.
Not a problem.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Pat.
it.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this morning. So for those who are joining us, so next slide, Willie, just as a reminder, we've turned off the chat feature, but you can raise your hand if Willie asks. It might be useful then he'll ask you a question, or you can put something in the Q&A pod. Like, for instance, someone says Pat should patent this idea. Actually, the good news is, Pat, by us going public like this, you can't patent it anymore. No one can steal your patent because it's not patentable anymore under the way the rules work these days. But it's your idea.
That's what my wife was saying. Geez, we ought to put a patent on that.
It's too late now. Sorry about that. There you go. That's the way it goes. Okay. Next slide there, Willie. Just for those who are on joining us, if you're interested, this is worth a professional development hour. It's worth 1 here in New York State. And the way you get that, if you move forward 2, I think it is, Willie. Yeah, it's worth 1 PDH. You got to stay for most of the time, only the person registered. The way this works is, one more move forward. You'll get a certificate for staying for 3/4 of this particular workshop or webinar. But if you stay for 90% and you send us your certificate after you get it, we can send you the professional development hour for those who are interested. If you're with another state, you'll need to contact your LTAP center. I don't know how many we have from out of state today, but that's what you'd need to do. So send us your certificate at the end that you'll get a couple of days after the webinar is done. So with that, Willie, move forward to your first slide, and we're going to let you get started. Pat, you and I can go turn off our cameras and go dark, mute ourselves, and we'll let Willie get started here. Thanks, Pat.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to talk a little bit about culverts today, and when we set up the date for this, we didn't really think it would be quite as timely with the ongoing heavy rains here in the eastern part of the state. We've got the hurricane / tropical storm coming through, but what we're going to discuss a little bit is common deficiencies that you will encounter in culverts. We're going to deal with some PM methods, and we're going to review repairs of culverts. So just as an introduction and for the purposes of discussion, so we're all on the same page here, we're going to go through some terminology. So the crown would be the top or the arch of the culvert. The invert would be the bottom part of the culvert where the water flows. The haunches would be the areas between the invert and the spring line, which is the widest point. And particularly with pipe culverts, we're going to emphasize bedding because that is crucially important to the long-term performance of the culvert. And that matters quite a bit during installation. If you don't install it right, you're going to have maintenance issues and problems over time.
Hey, Willie, before we get started, I forgot to see who's here. So we'll launch that polling real quick.
Yeah, why don't we do that? So
who's at your sites? You can vote. Who do you work for? And how long have you been with your job? So there's 3 questions. Make sure you scroll down and answer all of them. And we'll get at least 3/4 of you voting, just so we can get a sense. And that'll help Willie out as he's talking and moving forward this morning. And we're getting close here. Okay, almost to 3/4. Need 1. There we go. And I'll share the results. And so you can see most of you are by yourself. That's typical. It's what we've seen all spring. A few of you have a bunch of people watching, hopefully social distance. Local governments, by far, is the majority, is 3/4, but we do have quite a few folks from state and consultants. And we have 5 honest people there on the call today, Willie, who work for the weekend.
Hey, not only do we sometimes work for state, local governments, et cetera, but the weekend is foremost in our mind.
Yep. And then how long have you been there? About half of you have 10 or more years, but I went through these slides. There's actually a few things you can pick up. I picked up a couple of things. And if you're brand new, listen carefully. And again, you can always contact us for any questions you got. So back to you, Willie. Sorry about that. I forgot.
No problem. Okay, let me get rid of it. So here's a cross section of a culvert. Sometimes we'll have an apron out in front to manage erosion or scour, and we'll talk about that a little later. Sometimes we'll have a cutoff wall. Often we'll have a wing wall. Depending on the culvert, we may have a head wall or parapet if we have the road up here. We have the barrel, and we have bedding, which I'm gonna harp on. And we have the joint, which we often have in culverts as they come in limited sections. Okay, common shapes. Sort of all over the park. We've got round, we've got square boxes, we've got bottomless boxes, we've got oval, we have pipe arches, we have metal boxes, and you know, depending on what the most appropriate situation is depending on what you put in. The bottomless culverts are becoming more popular, or embedded culverts where the culvert's oversized and there's a natural stream bottom. The folks in the environmental agencies seem to like them because the fish can migrate through. Okay, culvert materials. Commonly, we have concrete, and it's concrete, it's rigid. It is dependent on bedding. It needs to be bedded correctly for it to perform well over the long term. I have some slides coming up showing how concrete culverts crack, and that's all predicated on how well the bedding is installed or how well they're bedded. Smooth interior. Concrete is relatively smooth. Water flows through it fairly easily. Joints are 4 to 8 feet apart, depending on the size of the concrete culvert. And sometimes we'll get boxes that are skewed, and occasionally we'll cut skewed ends on regular concrete pipe. And here's some photos of concrete pipe. We got a pair of round ones in the upper corner. We can also get the horizontal elliptical, which are widely referred to as squash pipes. Vertical elliptical, which is essentially a squash pipe on its side. You can get arch pipes. Precast box culvert. The one here is in Saratoga County, which was actually set last week. So I see Peter is on the call or on the webinar, and that's one of his that Saratoga County is replacing and will be maintaining in the future. And this is a bottomless one. Sometimes boxes are cast in place. But it seems like lately the industry has gone more toward precast boxes.
Willie, what's the span on that bottomless pipe?
That span, I believe, is like 18 feet. It's a Culvert, New York project.
Okay, thank you.
Just big enough that it's not going to get a bin. Okay, then we move on to corrugated metal. It's flexible. Maybe a little less dependent on the bedding, but very much dependent on the interaction with the surrounding soil and compaction. Corrugated has a rough surface. It's irregular. Very often they're 20-foot single pieces of pipe with joints that are about 20 feet apart. They may be steel or aluminum. Round goes up to about 15 feet in diameter. Plate pipe arches, we can get up to 55-foot or 50-foot spans, and the bottomless ones, 55 feet. These metal pipes are flexible. As during installation, they will move a little bit, and if there's any settlement, that kind of thing happening, you will see bellies, deformations, irregular shapes in the pipe. Okay, for smaller culverts up to about 6 feet in diameter, polyethylene seems to become very popular, and with the it has smoother corrugated interior. The smooth interior poly seems to hold up fairly well, but like the metal, it's flexible and very dependent on interaction with surrounding soil. What I want to do is get a show of hands. Who's had experience installing polyethylene or metal culverts?
So raise your hand if you've installed a flexible pipe, the corrugated metals or the HDPE. We're about 1/3 so far, and I expect people are just trying to find their hand, Willie.
Right.
I expect a lot of people have installed these things.
And
About a little less than half.
yeah,
right now.
so and sometimes it goes really quickly and easily, and other times they can be a challenge. Okay, now, and I'm going to harp on this because if they're installed correctly, it maximizes the opportunity to have it perform well over time. It's all about compaction and bedding with culvert installation. And if that isn't done correctly, you're likely to have problems. And then on top of that, maintenance, if you properly maintain your culvert, and I'll show you some things where maintenance wasn't successful, you will have problems and you will likely have to replace the culverts. Okay, common problems we have: debris and siltation, leaking joints, settlement and sinkholes, which are, the sinkholes and settlement are very often a symptom, not really the disease. We can have undermining. With metal culverts, we can get damaged coatings, which can lead to damage to the invert or deterioration. We can get dents and localized damage, and in concrete, we can get cracks and spalls, and in the flexible pipes, we can get deformation. So, first thing we want to deal with is debris and siltation. So what we have in the photo is a twin culvert, you know, two pipe arches. If everybody can see the one over here on the right, there's lots of vegetation, a nice silt bar. Just for again, show of hands, does anybody have multiple pipes, and has anybody ever seen something like this before?
Again, about a little less, just a little less than half, really.
Yeah, and this is one of the eternal challenges with the with multiple pipes. You don't always have the vertical room you need for the waterway opening you need, and sometimes you have to go with multiple pipes. But invariably, what happens with these is most of the flow will go through one pipe, which we see here with the flow on the left, and the other pipe or pipes will often silt up and grow vegetation, which impairs the waterway opening should you get a storm event like we're getting in the eastern part of the state here today. And this culvert will not pass all the water it needs to. So what can often happen with these is with the flow being pushed to one side, is we can get scour over here on this side of the inlet. We may get some scour at the outlet. It looks like here we can see the bottom of the pipe, so we may be starting to get a little bit of undermining. And if we get a storm event and the culvert can't pass what it needs to, we may overtop the road. We can sometimes get soil built up in culverts, and this will, like in the other one, reduce your capacity. I talked a little bit earlier on about embedded pipes. Sometimes it's an oversized culvert and we want a natural bottom in it, but that's not always the case. Soil in the pipe in the culvert may be due to hydraulics in the stream. We may have an issue with aggradation where the general stream bed elevation is rising, and that's just a natural phenomenon, but we need to look carefully at that when we install culverts in the first place. Or soil in the culverts may indicate that we have joints that are failing, and that's how the soil is getting into the culvert. So let's talk a little bit about debris. This photo was taken in early July of 2005. We had a dam failure in Washington County. I see Phil Spezio is on the webinar, and he is probably familiar with this. So the following day we came out to assess damage, and this was a box culvert, and if you notice, there's a lot of debris that got washed into it. Fuel tank, lots of vegetation, and because of that debris, it impaired the amount of water that could pass through it to the point where the culvert overtopped, and there was road embankment over here on the right. So that's an extreme case of what debris and heavy flow can do if culverts aren't maintained and cleaned out regularly. In this particular case, in addition to the overtopping and debris, this was not a bottomless box, and there was some significant undermining that had to be corrected also. Okay, leaking joints. Sometimes they separate, which is what we have up here. And this is flexible culvert, and the joints are separating, and it looks like we've got some material that has migrated in, so we're just left with large stone. Sometimes the joints and culvert is damaged during installation. With these cracks here in the bell, it's entirely possible once that's installed, we could have some leaking issues. The other issue with opening joints is poor bedding and subgrade. In Washington County, when I was superintendent, there were some roads that were constructed on clay soils, and we had some areas where we had some substantial embankments on clay soils with concrete pipe at the bottom of the under the embankment. And what we found was that we had joints separating in the concrete pipes because the clay in the middle of the embankment settled more than at the edges of the embankment. So the culvert ended up with a smiley face, kind of downward bow through the middle with the joints opening up at the bottom. So if you're likely to have settlement, you want to be conscious of that. Now, what can joint defects do, or leaking joints? What kind of problems can they cause us? Well, being New York and wintertime and freezing, we can get water infiltration that freezes, as we've got in the photo. This photo was actually taken in Minnesota. It was a Minnesota DOT photo. But if you have water migrating in, we can also get soil infiltration. And if you've got soil infiltrating in through the joints, what that means is that soil is coming from someplace, and it's typically coming from the embankment above, which can lead to sinkholes. It could also be coming from below or the sides and destabilize the pipe and the bedding. Here's another extreme case where we've got a big joint problem, and we've got quite a bit of soil coming through. But in addition to that, we've got a perforation of the invert. Okay, so this looks like a fairly small, relatively innocuous hole in a city street. This is a illustration of potential leaking joint problems or opening joint problems. This was on Route 50, or actually Ballston Avenue in the city of Saratoga Springs back in 2015. This was a mill and fill area, and the contractor milled the asphalt and paved an overlay. And there was a concrete culvert underneath. And several days later, actually like 3 weeks later, city got a call, said, hey, there's a hole in the road here. So since we were working on the adjacent construction project, I got to go out and take a look at it and put a stick rule down that hole, and it was about 4 feet deep. And the contractor came out, excavated, and it was about a 6 foot diameter, 4 foot deep hole. And what had happened was when the milling and paving operations had vibrated a joint that wasn't in good shape to begin with, loose, and we had quite a bit of rain, and the soil infiltrated and caused that problem. Okay. Sometimes the water coming out of the culvert or going into the culvert, depending on where it's focused, can cause scour, undermining, erosion problems. This particular location is maybe a mile downstream from the earlier plugged culvert I showed as a result of that dam failure. And there was a fair amount of head behind that culvert during the dam release, and it was basically coming out of these boxes like a fire hose and took out, and it scoured the toe of the bank and caused this bank to collapse. Okay, dense and localized damage. This particular culvert has a big crease in the top of it. We suspect what happened here was during installation, whoever was installing it backed over it with the track hoe or the dozer before there was adequate cover on top. And as you can see here, it says 25% deformed vertical. Well, that's going to have some fairly significant capacity impacts because that's not going to take the water that we need it to take. In addition, you see down here, the joints are failed and open, which is going to be problematic. And we're going to talk about some repair options later, but if we don't want to have to dig it out, something like this is going to severely limit the options we have for relining it. Slip lining, for example, is not going to be an option here because you're not going to be able to slide something in with anything remotely close to the capacity we need. Here's another deformation of the pipe. This is less severe. And it's similar to what I was discussing with the concrete pipe, where it's bellied or settled out in the middle. Okay, with concrete pipes, And I didn't mention, but also vitrified clay pipes, which some of us will have in our older inventory. You can get cracks and spalls. Here's a crack, the longitudinal crack down the spring line of a pipe. Now, when you're looking at your rigid pipes, concrete, where the cracking is will indicate what the mechanism that's causing it. If you've got cracking at 12, 3, 6, and 9, it's probably due to poor side support. So as the pipe is loaded, it's going to tend to push out. If you have cracking at 5 and 7, these are longitudinal cracks, the haunch areas were not compacted adequately during installation, or there has been loss of support there. So that's where you're going to get that type of cracks. If you have good side and haunch support, you should retain the integrity of the pipe and not have cracking, or longitudinal cracking anyway. Now, if you've got transverse or radial cracking, it indicates issues along the length of the pipe with support. If your cracking is in at the invert, you've got typically inadequate support in the middle. And if it's at the crown, it's inadequate support at the ends. I'll go to the illustration. Typically, concrete pipe is bell and spigot, and the diameter of the bells is a little bit larger than the spigot, so everything fits together. If the pipe is completely resting on the bells with no support along the barrel of the pipe, you're likely to get a broken belly and that radial cracking or circumferential cracking at the bottom in the invert. If the barrel of the pipe is supported, but the bell ends are not, the likely symptom will be a broken back or circumferential crack at the crown of the pipe. So as we move on to other things we find, here we have damaged coatings. Very often our metal pipes are galvanized. They may be coated and asphalt coated and galvanized, but over time, those coatings will deteriorate. In this particular case, we've got a galvanized plate pipe, and I suspect that everybody who's seeing this photo, looking at it, can estimate about where normal high water is, because right at the spring line is about where the corrosion and loss of galv is. And then down here, we have, we don't appear to have a lot of corrosion because that's being scoured away on a regular basis. And we have section loss. Now, the loss of coating in and of itself isn't typically a huge problem, but it means it's a preview of things to come, and it means that we're going to start having issues with corrosion and deterioration that we're going to need to deal with at some point in the future. If that goes unchecked, the loss of coating, we may end up having, pitting and corrosion, which will start to deteriorate the pipe and lose section loss. Now, the key indications of these, or what will cause that is either acidic or saline water. So if you've got a lot of salts or acids, you're probably not going to want to use a metal pipe. And soil chemistry is an issue. If you have low electrical resistivity, it will accelerate corrosion. In concrete culverts, if you have high abrasive bed loads or water chemistry with certain chemicals in it, it will eat your concrete and destabilize the culvert. And if that goes unchecked, you can lose your invert. Could be, corrosion. It could be abrasive bed load. It could be combination of both. Very often, abrasive bed load will scour off the coating, and then the rust will start. In this particular case, the water is flowing this way, and the upstream side of the corrugation's deteriorated.
Hey, Willie?
Yes.
Somebody in the Q&A mentioned that there is a water condition calculator available for CMP pipe from the National Corrugated Steel Pipe Association.
And that is an important tool to use because it will give you an indication of what you need. And the corrugated metal folks really don't want you using their stuff where it's not going to work out well because it doesn't reflect well on them.
Well, the other thing you can do is the state in their highway design manual has charts where they've done some of the calculations, and you can use them as a quick guide to see if you're close. And if you're in certain parts of the state, they actually don't even recommend aluminized steel type 2.
Right.
About a little over 20 minutes to go, Willie.
Okay. So settlements and sinkholes. These are issues that can happen if you have problems with your inverts or joints. The one on the right's in California. The one on the left's in California. The one on the right is in Essex County on a road that's being reconstructed as we speak. Sometimes the whole thing will go south, and this obviously was not maintained. Or it could just collapse on you. So these are some of the problems we can have. Now, how do we fix it? How do we deal with it? Well, let's deal with debris. You got to get it out of there depending on what it is. Debris, sediment, vegetation, and we can do armoring or scour protection. So how we approach debris removal depends on what we've got. This is a livestock gate that's stuck under here. We've got silt, and the other issues are what are our environmental restrictions, and how big a culvert do we have? Can we get in there? Do we need to contain that silt and debris, or can we just dig it out? Is it a confined space? How concerned are we about contaminants in the water? Is it a trout stream, or is it just a ditch? So large debris, what do you use? Often outside the pipe, I've seen excavators with the thumb that grab debris. Large equipment, I've seen manned entry. Folks go in with chainsaws, cables, and hook them up and tow them out. Mandrels, a smaller pipe with debris inside. I've seen the track hoe with the basically a piece of telephone pole just to push stuff through. For silt, vac truck in Washington County, a vac truck sewer jet in Washington County, we managed to get the old sewer jet from the sewer agency. And for smaller culverts, that was reasonably effective, provided there weren't other distresses. You can, flush it out with a fire hose. In an earlier photo, we saw a bucket line being pulled through. And in large pipes, if you can get mechanical equipment in the waterway, you can sometimes use a small skid steer or small excavator. Scour repair depends on the severity. You know, what do you want to do here? But before you do anything, you want to talk to your hydraulics folks to make sure you're using the appropriate material. You don't want to use stone that's way too small because it's just going to get washed downstream, or way too big. You may need to grout. And if you're working in the stream, yeah, you're probably going to require environmental permits. Michigan DOT was having some issues with scour in their underwater, or their bottomless culverts. So they devised this device to help them place riprap in their bottomless culvert. Watch the video here. And basically this is a raft of sorts with a hopper that holds relatively small size stone fill that they lower down into the waterway with a crane. They probably should have used the tagline. And they, because it floats, they float it into position. And when they get it where they want it, drop the stone where they need it.
And then afterwards, they can fill it with ice and have a cooler.
That's right. As they go, floating down the river. Other options, if you have scour at the inlet or outlet, is a riprap apron. This is a Georgia DOT detail. Concrete apron. And you'll want to talk to your engineering folks to make sure that you're sizing and placing it appropriately. Now we're going to get into more than just basic maintenance. We're going to get into repairs, fixing things. If you have the potential for scour and undermining of your culvert, looking at a toe or cutoff wall may be helpful. It won't prevent the scour hole, but it will keep that scour hole from migrating underneath the culvert and destabilizing it. But in order for this to work, that cutoff wall needs to be below the maximum expected depth of scour. So you'll need to talk with your some hydraulics folks to make sure you're down under that. And to do that, stream gets diverted, form the toe wall, anchor it or attach it to the culvert, cure it, put back scour resistant material in your backfill, and you're back in business. And like many of these, they're much easier described than actually executing. If you have invert failures or invert deteriorations, there are methods to fix that, including placing a paved concrete invert, armor plates, or geosynthetic composite mat. This photo is one of a culvert that New York State DOT repaired with their own forces here in Washington County. They diverted the stream. They cleaned the invert, formed and placed the concrete, and restored the flow. And we have a concrete invert here. If you have severe abrasion problems, armor plates can be used. And This may not sit well with the environmental folks, but it may preserve the culvert invert. And basically, a flat plate is anchored in concrete on the bottom with plates up the side. And
Willie, one thing you can do there is put in those baffle plates, the vertical ones, to slow the flow down. That's a balance.
It's a balance, right? And this will keep the it's a much heavier plate, and this will keep that from deteriorating out the invert. And the plates are welded here on the edge of the pipe and anchored to a concrete bed in the bottom. And this is a proprietary material, which is basically 2 pieces of geotextile with, it's like a geotextile quilt with mortar in between. And shows up dry, it gets, you clean the culvert, you lay the pieces in a shingle fashion, attach them, wet them down, let the cementitious material cure, and back to stream flow. Joint repairs. This is an extreme case with clay pipe, but you know, possible ways to do joint repairs are internal bands, chemical grout seal, or collars. This was a reline job, but the internal bands can be used for existing joint separation issues if they don't need to be watertight, and the bands are put in place and forced into place with the threaded rods that you can see. The limitations on this are the joints have to be reasonably well aligned, but just starting to separate. If they're badly out of alignment, you're not going to be able to line the bands up. The other issue is with the threaded rods on the interior of the pipe, they can accumulate debris. Again, a little more extensive, chemical grout injection, and this can be done either from the interior or from above, and it creates, and the grout is often a hydroreactive grout that reacts with the water and will form a seal. Typically done by a specialty contractor. And if all else fails, it's kind of the, you dig it up. If the pipe is fine and the joint doesn't need to replace, you form and pour a concrete collar around it, but you need to make sure you get inside and either, or seal it up so you don't fill your culvert with pipe, or with concrete while you're forming things up, or pouring concrete rather.
That might reduce capacity a little bit.
Yeah, it would just a little bit. And this actually is a Florida DOT detail. Now, when things start to really go bad, you can look at relining your pipes. You can slip line, you can shotcrete or spin cast, or you can use cured in place. So for relining, for slip lining, you use corrugated metal, pipe or plate arch, depending on the size. You can use smooth interior metal pipe. You can use HDPE. Now, the issue with slip lining is in order to fit inside the old pipe, you're going to reduce the waterway area a little bit and reduce capacity. So you're going to want to make sure this is engineered correctly. There are also limitations, because if you've got major deformations, it's not going to slide through. You're going to have a problem. This is a photo of Washington County DPW crew slip lining a pipe arch on a bottom, or a corrugated arch, bottomless culvert. They poured new footing and then bolted the arch together and slid it through. The challenge with this one is it was skewed, so the forming became a little more interesting to form and fill that annular space with grout. And here on the right shows what they had to do to keep the corrugations from leaking when that was placed. And in this particular case, they poured it, excavated in the top. Here's the old pipe that was cut out. Here are the corrugations of the new pipe, and the concrete was placed down there and vibrated in. For other ways of slip lining where it's slid through, there may be grout ports in the pipe and grout may be pumped in. And in this particular case with the polyethylene pipe, they had grout injection pipes at various lengths and locations to fill that space with grout. And relining, you can also use spin cast or shotcrete, uniform concrete interior. Spin cast, there's a rig that spins and sprays concrete uniformly around it. And this method is more forgiving of distortions and than slip lining. But again, you got to clean it out.
We have a couple of notes here that we're putting in the Q&A pod real fast. One was somebody mentioned DOT will actually use shotcrete for doing bottom repairs. And the other note.
Yeah, that can work.
And then the other note was that DOT doesn't endorse spin casting.
Okay. DOT may not. The folks, other states like Alabama has had good success with it.
I think it comes down to your QA/QC.
QA/QC is critical, particularly with any of these shotcrete type applications. And whoever's operating it is very important to have it being successful. Larger culverts or irregular shapes, shotcrete may be appropriate. And then another option is cured in place pipe. And that's a resin impregnated felt liner that is inserted into the pipe, and either a hot air or hot water cures that thermosetting resin, and you have a new smooth line plastic pipe. And one of the processes uses an inversion method, so it's sort of like a sock that you fill with water and it pushes it against the walls of the pipe, and then that water is heated. And in some locations that can be successful, and that's the inversion coming out the far end of the pipe. And I have had some exposure to this type of application. It's not inexpensive, but if you can't close the road, it may be a viable alternative. And then finally, footing repair to bottomless pipes. Challenge with this is we're working in tight spaces. And you got to do some stream diversions. It's like any other concrete repair, you're getting down to sound concrete, below scour depth if you need to. We got failing concrete here. The arch is basically in good shape, a little bit of deterioration here, but in this case, it was just fix the footing. Assess your unsound concrete, put in new rebar and concrete, clean it up, pour, and reestablish the stream. Okay. Now we're at the point where we get to review things. David, do you have the?
I'm ready to go.
Okay, poll question 1. Okay, corrosion in metal pipes can lead to which of the following deficiencies? Invert damage, deformation, undermining, or all of the above?
Go ahead and vote. We'll see how you do. By the way, Willie, while they're doing that, someone mentioned there's a group studying some of these cast techniques. We'll see how the
Okay.
results come out.
Yep.
And a lot of sanitary sewer types are using the hot socks.
Yeah, it was originally developed for sanitary, and because those are places you can't dig things up. I think the limitation on the size with those is up in the realm of about 60 inches.
So, okay, here's our poll. I'll end the polling and share the results. And 96% said all of the above.
We're doing good. So that's great. Okay, next question. What would be a PM method for prevention of scour? A, riprap or concrete apron, installation of a tow or cutoff wall, slip lining, installation of geosynthetic composite mat or armor plate, A and B only, or all of the above?
You're making them think a little bit here, Willie. Come on, it's early.
Yeah. Well, at least this one didn't have none of the above and then all of the above below it, which causes all kinds of logic issues.
Yeah, well, we're getting close. I'll wait till we get 3/4.
Okay.
Somebody else mentioned here there's a NCHRP study looking at LRFD design for cast in place concrete.
Culvert? Okay, that would make sense because it's structural, it's a bridge.
Yep. Well, the challenge, of course, with that is how do you determine some of the resistance factors? So.
True.
Okay, I'm going to end the polling, share the results. 72% said placement of riprap and installation of tow cutoff wall, and 26% said everything.
Okay. The riprap and the cutoff wall are the answers we're looking for. The challenge with the slip lining or cured in place pipe is very often though we're going to a smoother or slicker material, and it can actually exacerbate the scour issues at the outlet because it may increase your velocities a little bit. Okay. Next one. Okay, which is not a viable method of lining a culvert with significant deformations? Cured in place, shotcrete, slip lining, or none of the above? And I'll kind of preface this with the waterway area is going to be adequate post lining it. If it's too far gone, it's too far gone.
We're getting there. We're about 2/3. We need a couple more votes. Okay, got 3/4. Here we go.
Okay.
Share the results. 3/4,
Okay.
2/3 said slip lining.
Slip lining, and that's the answer we're looking for. Because you're not going to be able to slide it through if you've got deformations. It'll interfere, hang up, you'll have issues.
And you'll have a hard time getting the structural support
Right.
you need. So
Exactly. So if anybody has any questions, I will be glad to field them.
put them in the Q&A pod if you've got any more questions. There's some great things we've had all along. So
yeah, I've appreciated the discussion. The these webinars are not nearly as much fun as in person, just because of the reduced amount of interaction.
Have you had any experience with rerounding of pipes?
I personally have not. I don't know if you have, David, or
I've heard of it being done, but it's very limited because obviously if it's a corrugated pipe, almost impossible. And so if it's not got much deformation at all, you're not going to do that much good. You might as well look at slip lining.
right. I have not had any experience with UV liners either.
I know some people who've used them. They're like hot. It's really the key of how do you cure the material after you're done.
Okay, so it's a UV cured liner?
At least I think that's the one he's talking about. I hope so. If he is, Andrew can let us know. That's the one I've read about. We'll see if he says here.
Okay.
And Brian says New York uses a lot of it. So.
Okay.
Yep.
So basically, in lieu of hot water or hot air, you're using a UV cure.
He says there's some here on our campus. Maybe Andrew can send me a note offline. I'll go find a picture and we'll share it with everybody.
Okay. And again, with the cured in place, in some places, the release of the hot water post cure can be an environmental issue. So you have to cool things down.
Yep. Okay.
All right.
Well, I think we've got that. I want to thank you, Willie, for a nice job. Again, we'll get the certificates out to people here in pretty quickly, and we'll go from there. Last slide for me, Willie, just so we can let folks know what's coming up.
Okay.
Oh, back up one.
There we
So
go.
we have a webinar next week on guide rail. And then one after that on gravel roads, and then we'll take a break around the Labor Day, let people finish up their construction season.
Great.
Okay, and with that, Willie, thank you. Nice job. And
Thanks,
everybody, have yourself a great day and stay dry. Hope the storm isn't too bad coming up.
And check your debris.
Yeah, definitely check your debris. Take care. Bye-bye.